Okay, Paul Sensei, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, James. Great to be here with you.
It's very nice to see you again.
And likewise.
So I guess we'll just jump straight into it. And I was wondering if you could tell the people about your background in karate, but even perhaps further back in that, maybe back to your football days.
Well, I didn't start karate until 1974, and I was 23 years old at that time. But I had played football basically coming up to that and wound up playing college football for Central Michigan University, which to me was somewhat of the first martial art, maybe. And then I took a period of travel in Mexico and Guatemala. And it was when I was in Mexico that I actually became interested in training seriously and began in Guatemala in 1974.
Is there a reason why you were attracted to karate, or?
I've always been attracted to karate. I was a big fan of Kung Fu and David Carradine, and I love the mystical aspects of that. And as well, I had been very interested in philosophy, in Taoism and Zen Buddhism. And to me, karate, I viewed it as moving meditation. And so that aspect appealed to me before I ever really started.
Ah, I see. And you started in goju-ryu, or did you start in another system, or move to goju-ryu, or?
No, I started in goju-ryu. I started in goju-ryu in Guatemala City, Guatemala, in 1974 with an instructor named Rodolfo Martinez. And he had been training in New York City, and he had been in the Shurikan system. And after he became a black belt, Taguchi Sensei said, if you go back to Guatemala and open a school and teach somebody to Shodan, I'll come to Guatemala and then test you. And so he had done that. And I ran into one of his students who was traveling to Guatemala, and they invited me to come down, so I did. And it was definitely goju-ryu, but Shurikan.
I see. And how was that training in that dojo? What was the training like?
It was extremely repetitious, you might say. A lot of basics. It reflected an attitude of karate that perhaps was representative of that day, or maybe even a little bit past. For instance, my first class consisted of following some footsteps painted on the floor that were sanchin stepping. And so for 2 hours, just step, 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 turn around, step, step, and that's kind of indicative of how things would go from then on.
Yeah, my actually I met a Taguchi stylist in Okinawa. It was my friend's uncle, and he invited me over to their dojo, and they have that board at their dojo.
Huh.
I know exactly what you're talking about. In terms of the conditioning, did they do a lot of like conditioning drills in that dojo, or?
Yes, a lot of basics, a lot of conditioning, and it was extremely hot. Guatemala City is somewhat temperate in that it has a little bit of altitude, but it also gets very hot during the day. And the dojo was downtown Guatemala City in this large building that also housed the National Immigration Center for Guatemala. Big cement building, and it got very warm.
How long did you train at that dojo?
I was only at that dojo for about 9 months, and then I had made a decision to go back. I was going to live in Guatemala. I was going to see this through. I was really hooked on karate, and so I was coming back to the U.S. to buy some equipment I needed, like a Volkswagen microbus and some amplifiers and guitars. I was going to be a musician down there, and the teacher at that dojo said, well, hey, if you're going to California, stop and see Kimo Wall. He's one of the amazing practitioners, one of the most incredible guys I've ever met. And so on that trip back to the U.S., I stopped in Santa Ana, California, and just turns out that Kimo Wall and his dojo were putting on a demonstration when I was there. And I watched their demonstration, and I was so impressed. I said, gee, I'd really like to stay here a while. And Kimo said, we'll stay. And so I did for about another year and a half.
Unfortunately, he just passed away recently.
He did. He did. And I must give him a lot of credit. I'm not sure he ever got as much recognition as he deserved, but many people deeply understand that he was a master.
And was Kimo Wall's training similar to your previous experience, or how is it different or the same?
Well, without being dramatic, I would have to say it was more severe. It was even more severe. And I guess the empirical evidence would be that the dojo we had in downtown Santa Ana that started off with a huge flurry, the students dwindled and dwindled and dwindled, and we wound up disassembling the floor and putting it in his backyard, and then moved the dojo to his backyard in Santa Ana. But for instance, he would have one night a week where it would be all basics. And you would just start doing head punches, 300 head block, 300 chest punch, and so on, you know, and 300 kicks, 300 punches in Shiko. And, you know, California can also get quite warm, so it had that in common with Okinawa. And very few students stayed in that dojo. Ironically, Kimo Sensei went to Guatemala, to the dojo I had come from, and was going to help them out. And he went down there, but was so severe that their dojo also suffered a loss of enrollment.
So I'm not too familiar with Kimo Sensei's background, but are they from the same organization, or?
He had actually trained in Higo Seiko's organization, and also with Matayoshi Sensei for his Kobudo. And then he went to train with Taguchi. And so he had very high quality teachers, all of goju-ryu.
And you said you stayed there for a year and a half, is that correct?
Yeah, about a year and a half.
And then where did your travels take you after that?
Well, I was actually on my way to Yucatan. I was going back to Yucatan to open a dojo there when I learned that I was going to have a son. And so stopped in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, not far from where I grew up, and settled there, and started a farmstead and began teaching karate there. And that was Kimo Sensei's mandate to me. He said, okay, you're leaving as first Q. And he said, when you teach somebody to black belt, well, then I'll test you. So I believe it was about 2 years after that or maybe a little longer, I went to Chicago, got together with Kimo, and that's when he tested me for Shodan.
And that dojo in the Upper Peninsula, how long did you operate that one?
Well, I guess that was almost 6 years. It produced a couple of black belt students. And then I relocated to the Lower Peninsula of Michigan in the Grand Rapids area.
I think that's probably where I first met you, is at the Wayland Dojo.
Yes.
I think I was 19 or something, or 18 at the time.
Well, it's been a long time, but a good time.
Certainly. So when did you start having a more direct contact with Okinawa?
That was 1985, and I traveled to Okinawa with Ernest Estrada, who was the one who spoke Japanese and also who was helping me and teaching me. And but when I was in Okinawa in 1985, I had no hope of training at the Yagi dojo in my own mind. I had always idolized Yagi Meitoku sensei as the senior, the man to train with. But I knew they didn't readily take Western students. And so I wound up training at the dojo of Eiichi Miyazato sensei and got to train there. This was only, the trip was only about a month-long trip. It wasn't a very long trip. And I had spent more than a week going around and training then at Miyazato sensei's dojo when the hotel clerk at the Rainbow Hotel, I believe it was, said, well, why, if you're training goju-ryu, why don't you train with the best? And I said, who would that be? He would go, Meibukan, Yagi sensei. I said, well, I have no way to go there. He said, I'll make an introduction. And so he introduced me to Yagi Meitatsu sensei, the eldest son, and he invited me to come and start attending the Meibukan classes. But I went very early, and when I arrived and saw Yagi Meitoku sensei teaching children, I was flabbergasted to even see him. So I watched the class, and I would come early every class and watch him until maybe about the fourth time I did that. There was no one there. There were no children there. There was another student there who did speak English, and Yagi sensei said, told the student, tell me, put your gi on and come on the floor. So I did, and he had me go through all kata, and then at the end of that, he told the student of his to tell him to come here at 8 o'clock in the morning. I'll teach him in the mornings. And so from then on, I would show up at 8 a.m. or early actually, and he would teach me for an hour. You must remember those days, basically, when Yagi sensei would teach in the mornings.
Yeah. So, let's see. There's a bunch of photos around Senoha Sensei's dojos from that time. A bunch of people sitting on stairs, all the top masters, and you're actually in the picture in the back. And what was it, a demonstration or something that had all those people together?
That was the following year in 1986. And so once I had that experience in 85, 86 was the 33rd anniversary of Miyagi Chojun Sensei's passing. And so there was the huge festival and demonstration to send Miyagi Sensei off after 33 years. And it was that occasion that I was there. And then I came a little bit longer. I was there 6 weeks that time. And I came for a month basically before the demonstration, did the demonstration with everybody, and then hung out just a little bit before I came home.
I see. And how many times did you travel to Okinawa in, I guess, between 85 and before the formation of the Ryusyokai in 1999?
4 times.
Four times.
I went back in 89, and 89 again I spent 6 weeks, and I got to train a lot with Yagi Dai Sensei at that time. And I went back again in 94, I believe it was, but he was not well enough to teach at that period of time. But of course I trained with both of his sons. And then, of course, we had contact with his sons as they would come over to North America during that period of time. So it seemed like a fairly continuous period of trying to learn.
Yeah, I believe I met the younger son when I was maybe 17 or 18 or something like that in Canada.
Yeah.
And of course, we would go down to Michigan if you had invited them, or you would come up to Canada if Perry Campbell had invited them.
Yes. It was pretty continuous, really.
So I guess we could start talking about your moving from the Meibukan into the Ryusyokai. What was that experience like?
Well, it was in 1986 when I really first met Sanaha Sensei. And I had been to Okinawa in 1985 and had been fortunate enough to take classes directly from Dai Sensei in the morning. 86 was the same thing. I came early, about 4 weeks early, but then we had the celebration for the passing of Miyagi Chojun. It's the 33rd anniversary of his death. And so they put together a worldwide celebration where if he was passing to the great beyond, we would want his spirit to be well contented. And so they put on a big demonstration, big party, and people came from all over to take part in that. Well, Yagi Meitoku Sensei had made 4 ninth dans the year before this demonstration. And Shinjo Masunobu was one. Kanai, I'm not sure of his other name, but he's a weapons master also. But then Sanaha Sensei, Sanaha Shigetoshi Sensei, and then Yagi Meitatsu. And that was the order of the ninth dans that he had promoted. And that was the order that they demonstrated at the 33rd anniversary demonstration. So, of course, I saw Sanaha Sensei and heard many good stories about him really being the senior of Yagi Meitoku Sensei. So I was interested to go and train with him, but I was training with both brothers as well as Dai Sensei, and there was little time to do that in 86. In 89, when I came back, I went to the Wichiru Full Contact Tournament, and I'd gone with Meitatsu Sensei and another Shorin-ryu, older master. And out front, we ran into Sanaha Sensei, who was also there as an invited dignitary. And I got to speak with him just for a little bit, and he offered for me to come and train with him if I could. But when I broached the subject, I was told that I could not go and train with him. And so I didn't. I let it go. But after I went back, and now I believe that was 94, and Yagi Sensei was living in the hospital at that time. I visited Dai Sensei in the hospital and trained at the Hombu Dojo, but it was obvious Dai Sensei was not going to be able to teach anymore. And it wasn't long after that, but maybe a year or two, that I decided I would really want to train with the senior of Dai Sensei, the person who had the most of Dai Sensei's technique. And so I then went to Sanaha Sensei and asked if I could be his student.
I see. And so in 90, he came to North America in 96, was it? With a group of Okinawan people, Vancouver and I guess Southern Ontario. Is that about the same time, or?
Yes, that was what followed, and that was actually when my training began in earnest with Sanaha Sensei. I had moved to Costa Rica and was living down there, but came back to Vancouver to meet Sanaha Sensei and Onaga Sensei and train with them there. And then followed them to London, Ontario, and trained with them there. And from that point on, it's always been Ryusyokai.
I see. Okay. Did you want to talk about, go back a bit in time and talk a bit about your experience with Dai Sensei, or?
Yes, well, I can, because it's not well known because I haven't spoken about it very often. But I had been there 85 and trained with Dai Sensei in the mornings. 86 trained with Dai Sensei in the mornings, and then 89 I went for 6 weeks and trained with him every morning. And I did not expect anything other than training. I believe he had made an agreement with Meitatsu Sensei to not issue certificates anymore. But at the end of my stay in 1989, one morning, as a surprise to me, he called Meitatsu Sensei upstairs to translate, and he presented me with a third Dan certificate directly from him, which to me was extraordinary. I felt very happy.
Yes, yeah, that would be a nice thing to have. And I noticed that you have some of his calligraphy on the wall in the background there.
Yes, yes. The one behind me is one of his very famous pieces of calligraphy that he would give to almost all of us when we would go over. I asked a group of Japanese teachers who were touring the states to give me a translation of this particular scroll, and the one thing they agreed upon is that it was somewhat like a cone, a Japanese enigma, and that each person would have to translate it the way they felt it should be. That the characters are clear, but the meaning is not as clear.
Mm. It's quite nice. I quite like it, actually.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Well, I guess we can move into the Ryusyokai era, from 1999 to the present.
Sure.
So, when did you actually first meet Senoha Sensei?
Well, of course, I met him in '86 when we had the large demonstration in Okinawa, and of course in '89 I met him, and again in '94. But they were only times when I would see him. I was never allowed to train with him, and I wanted to train with him, but I did not have permission to do that, and so I didn't. It was only after Yagi Meitoku Sensei passed away that I then went to Sanaha Sensei and, of course, became a student of his.
Yeah, he told me that he remembered you from the first demonstration that you'd done in 1986.
Mm-hmm.
So, did you find there was much difference between Senoha Sensei's teaching and the teaching in the Meibukan?
Well, I think that Sanaha Sensei best kept the teachings of Yagi Meitoku Sensei. I believe, and I spoke with him about this earlier this year, when he was stressing the importance of holding on to the teachings of Yagi Meitoku Sensei. And he said that he believes he has the most correct of those teachings, as he spent the most time with him when he was the most active. But a change I did notice is that Sanaha Sensei began to infuse goju-ryu with tea. And that was so refreshing and so innovative that he's really not changed. He didn't change the kata, or he didn't change anything other than he opened it up to show us the richness that was hiding there.
Yeah. You can. It's very easy for once you have that tea infusion to actually things become a lot clearer, I find.
Yes.
So, so you started in, and you've been back to Okinawa for the Senoha Sensei's international gashuku. Was the last time you came back?
That was the last time I was there. So I guess that was 2013. Is that right?
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, 2013.
And I'd been there 2010 also to go see Sanaha Sensei.
And you guys have invited him to Michigan several times, I think.
Yes. 2 times for sure. And that's what I can remember off the top of my head. And then, of course, in Canada, I tend to view those as somewhat collaborative efforts. You know, whenever he, like he was just in Canada in May, and we were there, we participated, even though he wasn't in Michigan.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's almost like a little Great Lakes country there. All around the Great Lakes is just like one country.
Well, I feel that way anyway. It's there's a lot in common, and our karate roots are so common as well.
So, anybody who's trained with you knows how well conditioned your bones are. Is that something that you've always been? You felt was important, or it was a carryover from football, or why are you like so damn tough?
I think conditioning is for me the baseline of karate is that it has to work. And the more tools you have in your toolbox, the more the better chance you have that you can make it work. And if your bones are conditioned so that you can take and deliver a strong strike, it just seems to me that you're better prepared. So I put a lot of time into the conditioning, and still do. Not so much time anymore, but I still condition now.
And what kind of exercises and things would you do to condition your bones?
Well, of course, years ago we always would use a wooden dowel to hit. I think two-person drills are some of the very best ways to condition your bones. Is that uh, hitting? But we would also use wooden dowels or some steel dowels at times. Of course, using the makiwara, a tire makiwara, which I used a lot in Costa Rica. Just simply hanging a tire and kicking and hitting that thing, I think, does help your bones as well.
I would think that it would be good on your joint too, because it's a lot more flexible than a stationary object.
Yeah, it is. It is. And for instance, in Costa Rica, well, that's a whole nother story, I guess. But we have a lot of time. I moved there in 1994 and have been back and forth. But in the dojo down there, so many of the people were very tough, and so you could get away with, okay, we're going to kick and block each other, So probably the drills where you just stand and somebody kicks, one guy blocks, the other one kick, you block it, but it can be extremely painful on the shins, but it conditions the shins. But the students, I had some indigenous people who were students there and who were tough as nails. So it was a wonderful time to condition with others.
And I guess, well, of course I know, but you're also like a big proponent of makiwara training.
Absolutely, and of course, my eyes got open to that too. I started off years ago just punching the makiwara, almost, everything was about force. And at the Ebersol Center, a place we used to live and have training sessions, I had a tree that I would punch the tree, punch the tree, punch the tree, to the point where as it grew, it actually, the bark wore off, and then also the tree was a little bit bent at that point where it got hit. It was dumb, by the way. This is not something that I'm advocating. Since then, I've wised up, and Onaga Sensei, much credit to him, really revolutionized my thinking about makiwara training, which is vastly different now.
So you mentioned that you would like to have as many tools in your toolbox as possible, and conditioning was one of them. Do you have any other tools that you'd like to tell us about?
Well, it's really changed over the years now, and to me, the Ju is a tool, and to actively learn how to use Ju effectively, and also to expand on the concept of Ti, where I believe that we all have our individual Ti, you might say, penetrating to what is the essence. In doing the techniques from a Ju point of view and with Ti, everything changes. And even beyond that, I believe that now the mental aspects or the electrical aspects of the art are also real and viable as tools.
For the people who don't know, what is Ju?
Ju?
Yeah.
Soft.
Okay, and I just trying to avoid too much jargon.
Oh, so thank you. Well, with Ju, I would say soft, but I would actually take it beyond soft. I would take Ju to be, in its absolute sense, almost nothingness. That as one tries to someone were to aggress upon you, that really you do not deal with them per se. You simply employ something where you're not there. It goes beyond softness, I guess. That's a whole conversation in itself.
Yeah, yeah. So what does your training consist of now? Do you mostly train on your own, or do you train in groups, or?
Well, I mostly train on my own, and I also, of course, teach classes. We have our dojo here. At the moment, we're only meeting once a week, however. And I also go to some other dojos of very high level people that I respect, who allow me to get in and work out with their people. And that to me is a real privilege. So I'm always trying to get, in addition to my class, somewhere else, at least once a week.
And does that consist of, well, I guess if you're at other dojos, that would be the more two-person training?
Yes, a lot of two-person training, exactly. And it gives me an opportunity to, I love to jump in with other people and to see if I can survive in that environment. Because again, having more tools in your toolbox, if your toolbox, you only have a few tools, that can be good too. But if you can use your few tools in many applications or in many situations, you can find out if they work or not. It's a myth when we huddle up with each other and say, "Oh, we're the best." Well, if you don't find out, you really don't know.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any theories on why there are so many high-level Okinawan practitioners in Michigan?
I don't. I don't know, but it's a reality as far as some wonderful people are here. And the other reality that's quite rare is that almost everyone gets along with each other.
I actually, for the first time, met James Thompson sensei a few months ago when he was here. I just bumped into him at the Budokan. He's quite a nice man.
He's a wonderful man, and I just saw him just a few days ago, last Friday, and the depth of his experience is phenomenal. And to be a United States citizen 10th Dan awarded from Okinawa is such a statement to his character as well as his knowledge and ability.
Also, there's Estrada Sensei, who is from the Shorin lineage.
Yes,
if I recall.
Yeah, that is correct.
I haven't seen him since it must have been 20 years now, I think.
Mm-hmm.
He when I first came to Okinawa to live, he was here on a vacation with Bob Giles.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again, he covered a lot to many of us in all of his publications and writing as well as his teaching. Those who are lucky enough to have copies of those books that he published, they're very good indeed.
Yeah, he came to, he was on a Canadian tour and he stopped in Sudbury first, and he had brought books, but I guess he figured he brought enough, but in Sudbury we bought all of his books that he had, so he didn't have any for the rest of the trip.
Yeah. Good. That says a lot for Sudbury. And there's Iha Sensei here also. We must not forget Iha Seikichi Sensei, who is 87 years old right now, I believe, and still training. He was the first 10th Dan of a Shorin-ryu lineage of Miyahira Sensei. Miyahira Katsuya, I believe.
Yeah, the Shidokan?
Yeah, Shidokan.
First time I met him was in Senaha Sensei's dojo. They were in the little apartment having tea and Okinawan donuts.
Oh, wonderful.
And I guess Senoha Sensei had become friends with him when during one of his trips to Michigan. So
Yes.
when he'd come back to Okinawa, he stopped by Senoha Sensei's dojo to say hi. And
Oh, that's wonderful. Yes, we actually, I can't remember what year it was. So that would be one more time Sanai Sensei was here. We did a joint summer international training session in Lansing, Michigan. Iya Sensei and his Shidokan group, and then Sanaha Sensei was Ryusyokai group. Ryusyokai was still a bit young at this time, and it was a wonderful showing that Sanaha Sensei could be there with Iya Sensei at the same time, and the Ryusyokai guys did a very good job. They represented themselves well.
So let's, well, we've covered the modern day. Let's, what are your feelings about the future of Okinawan karate?
As most things, it's a mixed bag, I would have to say, in that the opportunity for real knowledge is exploding. There are people like yourself who've been in Okinawa for many years and who have a good open mind and an empirical way of looking at things often, as well as culturally. There are many great Okinawan masters, I think, who are opening up and sharing in ways that they have never shared before. So in some ways, I believe karate is blossoming, and I think it's getting better. We can always look to the golden days, and yes, there were many wonderful things about the golden days, and some of those things are lost. But we also have other things now that maybe are also adding something to the system. So while there's tremendous potential, I also see the invasion of ego that has infiltrated so much of karate and introduced an element that goes totally contrary, in my opinion, as to what the real goals are of karate. And I think money, power, ego, those are the things that have the potential to hurt what's going on.
Yeah, they universally ruin most things.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
So how do you feel about the younger generation coming up? And do you think karate be better represented abroad, or still will have a stronghold in Okinawa?
I would say there's a leveling process that is going on. And I can't speak of Okinawa well. I haven't been there since 2013. And you know, I'm not able to comment on the state of the young people there. But I do see young people in other parts of the world. For instance, Cuba. We were just in Cuba. Sanaha Sensei was there, and I was with him when we went down this last May. And there are so many young people there who are very serious about it and who want to learn. And I think in many parts of the world, especially the developing world, karate still holds a high position and is held in high regard. The media hasn't totally falsified the image yet.
Yeah, I think the like you said, these teachers are a bit more open now, and I think that the level abroad of very traditional dojos is climbing and climbing. Let's talk a little bit about the difference between the traditional karate and the sports karate that most people are used to seeing. What would you say that the major differences between traditional karate and the sport karate world would be?
I believe they're two whole different animals, and each of them has value, but they're totally different animals. They're different beings. Traditional karate, if it is a life preservation system, I think that walking that line or preparing to walk that line of life and death is very different than preparing to go in and try to score a point. I think one becomes much more humble. The closer that a practitioner comes to understanding the reality of a martial system, the nicer person they become because they don't want to engage in a real, actual fight or encounter. In sport karate, often people are eager to enter into that fight and win the trophy or to prove that they're the best, or uh, it tends to feed the ego and there's no check and balance. There can be, and that's a great generality. But I'm speaking from, I took 3 years and did tournament cycle, open tournaments, 3 years, weekend, over and over and over, just to, well, for multiple reasons, but to experience that world fully. And then I competed at the state level, state championships, and then the U.S. national championships a couple of times. And then when I was done with that, left it completely, and I'm fully content to just be doing traditional karate.
Do you, well, I think that the sport karate is quite popular with the with younger people, and when they're, is there any, but when they get older, they, without the competition impetus, they tend to drop away from training. So
I would guess that that's an accurate statement, is that when you're not competing anymore, that you tend to not practice much anymore. And that fits in with all the other sports. Football has its end, basketball has its end, you know, almost all of the sports have their end. But with karate, there is no end. In fact, you'd better be getting better your entire life, one way or another. I don't believe in getting too lazy when you get older. That rather than just abandoning your training, you have to double down in other ways. You can't do the same training, but you better be attentive.
Is there anything you think that could be done to try to help these people sort of move into traditional training, karate world?
Yes. The most powerful thing is when people do sport karate long enough, some of them begin to see that there is a value in traditional karate. And then once they begin to catch on to that and look deeply, they see that there's a treasure trove there. And I've seen multiple cases where people who are doing very well in sport karate say, well, that's not so interesting to me anymore. I would like to train traditional karate.
I always found that people who did make the transition, that because of that sport karate background, they always had, I always felt they had very good precision in their movements.
I would agree with that. And their athletic ability often is amazing. I'm intrigued by the value of karate in the modern world. That so I can't tell you how many times I had somebody say, "Oh yeah, I'll just introduce them to my friend Smith and Wesson," you know, and often karate is over glamorized, or it's demeaned, it's misunderstood, and the question would be, where does karate fit into the modern world? And for me, it is in developing awareness of your situation. It's in being able to be kind or nice, even when others are aggressive or ignorant. As long as you know that you can handle this situation, you don't have to overreact. And I've had instances that could have been really very, very bad, but because you're able to remain calm and just talk to someone, that it's diffused, and it didn't have to have that negative outcome. I think karate absolutely has value in the modern world, maybe now as much as ever, even though we're not in hand-to-hand life and death fights very often.
Yeah, it definitely helps you when you get into an argument or something with someone, knowing that it's not likely to get physical, but even if it does, that stress has been taken away, that you don't worry about it becoming like physical anymore because you can handle it yourself. Right. So you actually tend to think a lot more clearly about your arguments when you're speaking to somebody.
Yes, I agree, and I believe it it's somewhat, you're much less likely to embrace the bravado or the threats or anything like that. It's much more likely a person is looking for peace more, and you're able to maintain your peace, hopefully, a little bit longer than you could have otherwise.
This might be a little bit off topic, but where do you think physical fitness fits in with karate?
Well, again, with your tools, if you're out of shape, you've lost some tools. And I think that you need to try to stay physically fit even as you go into old age. And there's where we're lucky if we have the example of the karate men who are able to show us that they can get into their 80s and still be practicing, still be training. But that changes. I did a lot of destruction, I believe, to myself when I was younger by being hard all the time. And some of our fighting was extremely rigorous, and there were times that, you know I'm suffering injuries now from bad training. I guess in that days I thought it would be physical fitness, but now the whole idea of physical fitness is stretch, but don't overstretch. Do these exercises, but don't overdo these exercises. Lift weights with fluid motions rather than statically pumping iron. It changes as you get older, but you still have to do it.
I find many karate people fall into one of two camps. They are either very intellectual into karate, or they're very physical. So I find a lot of, it's generalization, but a lot of Weichi Do people are very fit and very strong. And then I find that's more common there. But I find there's a group of people who are also like sort of mostly in their head. Do you find it, you seem to be able to straddle both those worlds quite well? Is there something that some tricks you have for some people, or some advice on how to do that?
Well, that's the joy of goju, that I feel if you can be hard, and I mean, seriously, somebody punches you and it's your choice if you want to break their arm or not, or a leg. And I know that sounds barbaric, but that's the far end of go, or go when you really hit somebody. But I also think you've got to cultivate ju every bit as much, and in my case now, much more, where that if somebody were to attack you forcefully, that you're able to simply change your body position and your angles and put them at a very bad position without actually really having to use any go, hardly at all. The go would only come in at the end. As far as the intellectual piece, the way I've dealt with that is don't talk on the internet at all, and basically avoid conversations with people, because it's amazing the people who can have an opinion and know so much and tear other people down. I've seen really accomplished karate men be criticized by those who have no right to criticize them at all, but they can in the democratic world of the internet.
The keyboard warriors, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're coming up on pretty close to an hour. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about, or?
No, I think that's. I believe that the effort to recognize Okinawa as the birthplace of karate is a good effort overall. And it's true. Karate is a product, a child, a baby of Okinawa that has grown into a full-grown art that now goes all over the world. And so I think simultaneously we need to recognize the roots in Okinawa. We also need to look at the original ideas, the original purposes, the original feelings of training. For example, I think that I'll give you a little story, an anecdote here. Yagi Meitoku Dai Sensei one day in one of the morning sessions, he said, count to 10. So I count to 10, count to 20, count to 20, count to 100. I start to count to 100. And, of course, I'm going, what is this? This is what a real waste of time. What's going on here? I'm thinking to myself. But then he wound up saying that we used to do exercises, flexible horses, other exercises at the end of class every night, and it would be nothing to get to 1,000 or to 3,000 counts of something. And I believe that, yes, that has its physical importance, but I believe that mental and spiritual, if we want to use that word, importance, is extreme, where a person can get to the point where it's just one technique, one technique, one technique. And I think going into that land is extremely valuable. And I think we don't want to lose that, and yet that's more difficult to accomplish today, I think.
Yes, for sure. I always find that's the easiest way to break somebody of their being too stiff when they're doing techniques. You just work them until they can't do it hard anymore, and then they have to do it soft.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. Well, thank you for appearing on the podcast, and I hope to see you soon in maybe Michigan or Okinawa.
That would be great. I know I'm planning to come for Sanaa Sensei's 80th birthday party.
Oh, okay.
So
that'd be cool.
Whenever that is, I think it's January next year or the year after, maybe.
I think perhaps, yeah, it's either next year or the year after.
Yeah. But if you get to Michigan, we'd love to see you. That would be awesome.
Yeah, I'd love to go.
Good.
Okay,
well, thanks, James, and good luck on all your podcasts. Good luck on this endeavor. I think you're the right guy to do it.
Oh, thank you very much for the encouragement.
Yeah. Okay.